Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Vanilla Combined Army against White Company, and the scenario is highly classified. Now, this is the list that I played for this game, and this list was entirely submitted by supporter of the channel Jordan, also featured recently in the Infinity 2024 All Factions tier list. This list was submitted by Jordan actually over a month ago with the request that I play this as a test concept. Now, full test concepts of lists are something that I will do sometimes on the channel because usually I prefer to play lists that I have written, but in this case the concept was interesting and Jordan asked if I had any feedback that I could give. So we're playing this list as it is, and frankly, as punishment for the fact that I left it a month before I actually got to this and had to be reminded that he'd sent it through to me, we're playing this list in highly classified. This list is not built for highly classified and is terrible for it. So this is a punishment on me, but we will talk about how the list played and some general takeaways, because yes, although this list is maybe not the best for highly classified, in fact it basically can't do a whole suite of the possible classifieds available, and the classifieds that it can do can be done by like 2 models in the entire list. It is attempting something interesting. And what this list is attempting is basically taking the concept of what if Shazvastii but in vanilla? And that is a very sound concept to at least experiment with, because a lot of Shazvastii's strengths really are in individual models. It's in the unit availabilities, it's in the unique profiles, which we won't have access to here, but the strength of those unique profiles has waned, and in particular the strength of the Speculo Mine Layer profile, which used to be incredibly strong, is now at best kind of okay because you can't offensively deploy mines with the impersonation skill where they would hit a model, an enemy model at deployment. You can't use Mine Layer to deploy a mine where it would detonate immediately upon the target if they performed any action. You have to allow at least some grace space, which really pins back the Speculo Mine Layer and makes her considerably less useful. There are nevertheless some good and interesting and high potential pieces in Shazvastii, so what if we just put them into a vanilla shell where we can avail ourselves of a number of the other good pieces in vanilla? And so, in that vein, we have the list led by a 23-point Mentor Lieutenant who is bringing counterintelligence, a robust LT. 23 points is frankly on the expensive side just for a single Lieutenant order, etc. But in this scenario, their Mentor is a veteran, it can do something in the late game, and counterintelligence is not a skill to be scoffed at. In some scenarios, in some situations, counterintelligence is particularly good, and a Camouflage Lieutenant is particularly good, of moderate use in this scenario. We then have a Sphinx, and the Sphinx is the big one, right? The Sphinx is the piece that exists in both Shazvastii and in Onyx and in Vanilla combined, and which every time I look at the Sphinx, I feel like it has to be able to do incredible things because it is 6/6 move, Thermoptic Mimetism -6, Thermoptic Camouflage. It can hidden deploy. It has Clamming plus. It's so much potential there in terms of sheer mobility, and it has a BS-14 Spitfire, and therein usually is the rub. That is usually the downfall of the Sphinx, is that there are some targets that it will struggle to engage. It has to operate as a predator, but in that role is potentially very, very strong. In Chasvastii, you can build the order base to support the Sphinx, but it does tend to suck a little bit of air out of the sectoral. The low end of Chasvastii is limited pretty much strictly to tiger creatures and, the R drone, whereas in Vanilla Combined, we can add in things like Garkis, Libertos, Datarazis, and Imitrons, and so those are present here in the hopes of letting the Sphinx fulfill its potential. In that vein, we have 2 R drones. We then have a Caliban. Caliban is an outstanding piece, AVA 1 in Vanilla, AVA I think 2 in Chasvastii. You will take 2 of them or more if they're available in higher numbers in Chasvastii occasionally, but 1 in Vanilla is excellent, and is an engineer, which means that it can repair the Q drone in Combat Group 2. Now, unfortunately, the Caliban is spec-trained troops, meaning that in highly classified, it can only do some classifieds, but it is an engineer, thank goodness, and it does have decharges. We then have 2 Datarazi, and these are a really big deal in terms of adding something to the Shazvastii concept, because they are impetuous smoke throwers, which will combine very well with the 2 tiger creatures in Combat Group 2. With a model that can stand behind the creature, a bit more controllable at speed 4 impetuous, to move through Fizz 17 effective smoke, to let the tiger then run up the field, that is a very nice self-contained package that you don't have access to in Shazvastii because there's no impetuous smoke throwers. Another thing you don't have in Chasvestii is the Libertos, which is outstanding. We have ample SWC to afford it in this list. And then a Gaki. Gakis are not as good as Tiger creatures, but one Gaki contributes well to an irregular lineup because it has Climbing Plus. It means it can do things like go after, for example, Masai Morans. And of course, it is much cheaper at 3 points less, which we need in this list. We could trim these Tiger creatures down from DA CCWs, or one of them down to turn this Gaki into an AP CCW plus Shock CCW Tiger creature. That would be a perfectly valid trade, but I actually think 2 Tigers and 1 Gaki is probably preferable to 3 Tiger creatures if 2 of the Tiger creatures that we're going to take have the DAs. We then have Norkias. This is a piece that Jordan really wants to like and wants to take and wants to use in this list, so I have not amended this. I personally am not a Norkias fan. I think Norkias in the Shasvastii shell as a concept, like if you could add him directly to Shasvastii, the fact that he can assume a marker state and move up the field that way is something that would be good with Shasvastii, but in Vanilla Combined you have smoke, and you can use that smoke to cover the advance of a piece. And once you take that advantage away from Norkias, an Umbra Samaritan does almost everything he does, and a number of things that he doesn't, for cheaper. Nevertheless, Norkias, in terms of high watermark close combat skills with +1 burst in CC, definitely exceeds a regular Umbra Samaritan, meaning that whereas an Umbra Samaritan annihilates non-CC specialists, Norkias annihilates non-CC specialists. But versus CC specialists, he has a chance that Norkias wouldn't, say versus other things in his weight class, going to burst 2 in active turn. You actually can take that attack. We then have 2 Imitrons, the aforementioned 2 Tiger and the aforementioned Q-Drone. I love fitting Q-Drones in lists. They're a piece that I find myself cutting far more often than I should. At 1 SWC and 25 points, you need to find an engineer for them, but if you find an engineer for them, and goodness, the Caliban is very serviceable, they are an excellent piece. Mimetism on a total reaction board is often nightmarish, and even like a tag, like a full main battle tag, BS14 burst 4, is fighting the Q-Drone on even odds. 4 dice 11 versus 4 dice 11s. Now the Q-Drone will eventually lose that fight just on sheer odds, and it can't survive a hit like a main battle tag can. But basically, putting your opponent in that situation is still excellent. Love the Q-Drone. So overall, what has been built here is, frankly, a very serviceable shell around the rest of basically around the Sphinx. The rest of this list is very functional and accommodates a Sphinx. I personally think we could cut Norkias, we could use those points maybe to bulk up, say, the Datarazi presence, something like that, turn one of these R drones into something, that sort of thing, but that is by no means essential. What we have here is a functional list, but it does need to be piloted with a degree of care, and you need to make maximal use of the Sphinx. In highly classified, it's going to be a bit of a rough ride. I'm going to be relying very heavily on Norkias and hoping for some good luck in the draw, but it is at least playable, and worst case scenario, we can attempt kind of an annihilation situation where we can use the scalpel potential of pieces like the Sphinx to go after my opponent's specialist and limit their ability to do classifieds. At least that is the hope. So we are going to be playing against White Company, piloted by local Nick, and I want to note just the name of this list. This is interesting because Nick thought that he was going to be playing against Torchlight Brigade, and in fact he built this list with the intention of having solid play into Torchlight first, and being able to do highly classified second. It can absolutely do highly classified. In fact, it can do highly classified certainly better than my list can by a considerable margin. But the primary concern is being able to survive and engage Torchlight Brigade elements, in particular the Silver Star Prime. The Silver Star Prime is just a HMG. It's very, very good at winning fights because of BS attack -3, high burst, the MSV1, etc. But it's just a +1 damage HMG, which means it's just damage 16, which means that dealing with something like a tag, you have to really put the orders through it to deal with a tag with the Silver Star Prime. And so what we have here is we'll go to Combat Group 2 first, a Guija, basically just Guija by itself, non-LT. I do like Guija Lieutenants, by the by, and you could afford one in this list, but there are Fusiliers, so the Fusilier Lieutenant will be safely hidden in the back. So we have a Guija. A Guija has perishingly little utility in highly classified, other than that it is a tag, and tags are always useful, and Nick has taken it because he anticipated me bringing a list that would topping out at damage 16 firepower with little armor piercing, and he intended to use the Guija to leverage, basically to leverage that relative weakness. As it happened, I didn't play a list that topped out at damage 16 firepower. I played a list that topped out at damage 15 firepower. So the Guija is going to be very useful for Nick. The rest of Combat Group 2, we have a Blade. Blade Ops Engineer is an excellent piece. Because it can't be linked in WhiteCo, Nick has just given it a pair of Yao Zaos, and he's taken the forward deployment version. Submachine gun decharges. This guy is very solid and highly classified. Important to note, it isn't a veteran, and veterans are something that Nick would have to be careful with, much like I would. But with tactical awareness and forward deployment, it can be very easy for it to do things like engineering classifieds. It's got mimetism, etc. to advance. It's got decent ballistic skill if it has to shoot a gizmo kit at something. So very, very solid piece. Two Fugazi and a Guilang. The Guilang would be deploying a deployable repeater in this particular case, but the Guilang is a piece that I am on record as not liking particularly much. And much like the Blade Ops, it has the curse of being spec trained rather than veteran or elite. But the MSV1 that a Guilang pays so many points for and is made so expensive by and so rarely uses with any kind of effect, in this scenario, and in particular the game we're about to play, would finally be worth the approximately 4 points it adds to the profile. So we've got that as a Combat Group 2. Then as Combat Group 1, we have a pure Fusilier core. This is basically built to house a paramedic and a hacking device and then a missile launcher for ARO duty. Very, very cheap, fuels out the rest of the list. We have Lang Kai, who I believe will be duoed with a single Varangian, a Beast Hunter, and then a Denavus. Denavus is an excellent hacker. You need hackers in this kind of scenario, etc., etc. Multiple levels of hacking redundancy, that's quite nice. And a generally well-rounded kind of offensive list. This is frankly not a fantastic list for highly classified, but Nick made the call that he wanted to be able to hold out against Torchlight Brigade first and do the mission second, and I think that's very viable as an approach. He'd be making good use of all of the pieces that he has, and there is just enough here that he can theoretically do anything that he needs, or just about anything he needs to in highly classified. Lang Kai being an impetuous troop is actually going to come up and be a bit of a problem because Lang Kai is one of the few veterans that he has access to, because Lang Kai is a character. But apart from that, this list has basically all of the tools that it needs. So here is our draw for highly classified. On the left, we have my secret objective, and frankly, I cannot ask for the deck to have been kinder to me than this. Predator is basically an ideal draw. For many factions, much of the time, the ideal draw would be to forward observe an enemy, because most factions will have the hacking to do that passively and for free at some point during the game. Not the list that I'm playing today, it is not capable of doing spotlights, which means that the only classified that it was likely to do without much effort over the course of the game was Predator. All I have to do is put 2 enemy troopers unconscious or dead by performing a CC attack. That I can absolutely do. I have a multitude of berserkers, excellent CC. Thank fuck for this. I would have been right up shit creek if I'd been given 2 choices and they'd both been things that I couldn't do. So the deck has been relatively kind to me here, and frankly, it has not been unkind to me with the remainder of the flop. We have HVT Espionage, which I can do. I have a single relatively mobile hacker, quite mobile hacker, realistically, that can enter a marker state. Cool. We have HVT Kidnapping. This is where you need a veteran, elite, or chain of command troop to civivac an enemy HVT. Now, this is one that actually is going to cause Nick some trouble, because his probably best veteran troop is going to be Lang Kai, and Lang Kai can't civivac. So this is one that Nick actually kind of can't do. Then we have Capture, which again requires veteran, elite, or chain of command just to be in silhouette contact with an enemy trooper in a non-null state on their half of the table. Enemy can be in a null or immobilized state. So I can do this, and Nick can do this. Excellent. And then we have HVT Identity Check, which needs a biometric visor, multispectral visor, or sensor, get inside the zone of control and line of sight of the enemy HVT. I can't do this because I have no MSVs, biometric visors, or sensors. Nick can, thanks to the Guilang. So this, and then Nick has drawn his special objective, which I don't know what it is, will be revealed during the game as, I can't remember what it's called, but it's the one where you use an engineer or a doctor to recover a trooper with a wound. That is pretty ideal for Nick. I think that is as ideal for him as Predator was for me. So this is ultimately a very fair draw. I am going to have my work cut out for me trying to play this, to be perfectly frank. You never want to go into highly classified being like, well, I can realistically do maybe 3 of these, right? Because I've got two veteran troops, and one of them is a mentor. But we're going to roll up our sleeves and do our best. So I win the roll very thankfully. Whip 14 tells Nick, I think, exactly that a mentor is coming. It certainly tells him that there is no aspect in command of the force, but I win the roll. I choose to go first, and Nick deploys on the right side of the table second. So we're going to put our Q drone up here on this building, backed up by a Caliban engineering drone. The Q drone is going to have line of sight sort of like underneath this building, but really only so far, but otherwise has sort of like nice clean lines of fire into this part of the table, and some capacity to it'll sort of be able to see any attempt to really push into my DZ. It's in a good position. I didn't want to put it on this rooftop here because there are enough Climbing Plus and Super Jump possible guns in White Company, in particular Kahu was what I was afraid of, that we were not going to play these little ridges on the rooftop, which are less than the height of a base, as providing cover, which meant that a piece up here, like in any of these positions, would have me out of cover. And that's a really easy way to lose your Q drone. Where you want the Q drone to be is in a position where when it goes unconscious, it falls out of line of fire. And that meant this building here. So around that, we've got a Tiger and a Dadarazi pair down here. I've reserved Norkias, and I'll get to that in a second as to why. I deploy my Sphinx in like basically balls out in the open in this position here. It's in cover, obviously, but it is intending, it's going to be on the table. It isn't a surprise. It being deployed as a Silhouette 6 Mimetism 6 camouflage marker means it's either a Sphinx or an anathematic, but I want it to be able to move by using its tactical awareness order. I'm going to be going first. I want that tactical awareness order, and in any case, I feel like I have to reserve drop Norkias in this situation because I have to get classifieds done with him before he dies, or I will lose the game. That means I have to know where Nick's HVT is, so he has to be my reserve. We then have over here a Gaki. I think there's a tiger creature there and a Dadarazi here, so another warband package. We're in reasonable cover behind these sort of like high fences. They are being treated as solid. I've put my HVT here, guarded by a Libertos mine and a Libertos. So the plan is to build a little bit of a fort kickass in this space to make it challenging for Nick to move in on my HVT and do things like capture or identity check. We have the Caliban up here behind this building. Slave drone is, of course, behind the Q drone. Then we have R drones and Imatrons scattered around, and the Mentor is hanging out in the backfield. Nothing that will be particularly important to the game. Nick then deploys all of his reserves. The Guida is going to be the reserve. It'll come down last. He puts his HVT down over here behind this barricade. The Fusilier link goes in this building with the missile launcher here. Nice clean lines of fire along basically the approaches to his deployment zone. He puts a smattering of Varangian Guard, so there's one Varangian Guard here, another Varangian Guard here, linked with Lankai over here. The Denavis will be back behind this building, and then he does something that I think is quite spicy, and was a very, very good incidental play that he did for mission purposes. So what he does is he deploys the Blade Ops here, and he puts both Fugazi drone bots basically in high places, watching a lot of the board with helper drones behind them. And he does this because he's going to try and accomplish the classified where he scores it by recovering a unit, structure, or wounds using an engineer or doctor. But incidentally, what it means is that he has just a ton of flash pulse picket presence that is going to make low risk in the sense of low material loss discover rolls with just these 7-point dudes. So as I'm moving pieces forward, because I'm relying on camouflage and cybermask in some cases to move my pieces forward, he gets to make clean discover rolls off of very, very, very high vantage points. These buildings are quite tall. Nick picked this side for a reason, which then maybe baits me to respond, but Norkais is not going to do that, and even the Sphinx doesn't really want to because it'll clear it out of camouflage. And if I do use that opportunity to destroy one of these Fugazi drone bots, he's just going to recover it trivially using tactical awareness from the Blade Ops and score his classified. We then have camouflage markers here and here. This one is the Beast Hunter, and then this one over here is the Guilang, and it pops a deployable repeater down right there in the midfield, which is going to be absolute hell to deal with. I have to get up into the building somehow. Could do it with a Gaki, but I ultimately just decide to avoid it. I pop down Norkias over here, where he'll be able to move out safely, because Nick's HVT is over here. And then Nick's reserve is the Guija, in the highest spot on the table, And we are treating this building as infinitely tall, but that still gives the Guija, it is back in the deployment zone, which means engaging it with a Spitfire is challenging. It can't guts anywhere, so it is absolutely going to stay where it is. It is in cover behind this sort of bit of scatter terrain here, and it is in the highest point of his deployment zone, watching a lot of the table, thanks to the height that it has. So, this decision was made basically because he looked at the list that I had, and he pretty much came to the determination that I did not have enough firepower to contest this thing. He was relatively confident. Like, he put this thing down facing the Q drone, being like, you know what? I want to engage it with the first order of the turn. The Guija is just going to shoot the Q drone first order of my first turn. But I don't think Rob can dislodge this thing. And he was absolutely right. So I begin my first turn. He takes orders away from the Q drone and sorry, away from the Sphinx, which is probably the right call from his perspective, but which I am happy with. So we make a variety of safe impetuous moves first. Dadarazi moves forward, Gaki moves forward. Tiger moves forward. This Gaki stays where it is, because if it moves forward, it will get shot. There's this line along here that the Guija has. It will get shot by the Guija. So it stays where it is, but we got a variety of other safe moves. This Dadarazi moves up and around this way, which gets some smoke down, which then gets this Tiger creature forward. It's all fairly good. We then, first thing we do, since we have smoke here, is we move Norkias up and around using the NCO order. And we're able to do this just with the smoke. We basically don't need Cybermask. We can pop prone down here, crawl around this way. I actually go into Cybermask just to be sure at this point, but it is fundamentally not necessary. So we crawl up and around here, get ourselves to this position, and we do HVT espionage on the HVT over here, and then pull back underneath this building. So we've pulled back. We will re-enter Cybermask just because we have a spare order at the end of the turn. But basically, Norkias is here and he is safe. He's staged fairly far up the board, and I've got one classified done. In Combat Group 1, I basically spend a good 5 minutes trying to figure out what the hell I do in terms of actually progressing the game state from here, because it is not looking easy. The Sphinx is what we're going to be using because it is pretty much where all of the juice is. These pieces, like the fact that there is the Fugazis and the Guija and the missile launcher, mean that any attempt to punch through with, say, a combination of smoke and tiger creatures. Firstly, the tiger creatures have no orders because I spent them all on Norkias, so it would just be Dadarazi, and Dadarazi are not going to have enough orders to get like smoke down in all of the places that they need to come. Actually, I'd need it here as well because there's this Fugazi drone bot to come around and do what, like kill a blade operative, maybe? That would be, it turns out that would have been very valuable, but it's just not necessarily like there's too much smoke that I would need, and I'd be weaving them with a single Dadarazi, so it's like, you know what, we have a Sphinx, let's put the Sphinx through its paces. So we move it up and forward, and we're able to just barely, like by the millimeter, position it in about this position here, slice the pie, and draw line of fire on the Fusilier missile launcher. And this is a nice clean engagement. This is happening within 24 inches, which means the Fusilier is in a really rough spot, and the Sphinx shoots it multiple times and puts it all the way down to dead, which, among other things, means that if Nick has the classified where he wants to recover things, Paramedic is not getting that back up. From there, if we want to progress, we in order will have to fight the Guija, and then this Fugazi, and then this Fugazi. And frankly, engaging, especially this Fugazi back here, will be very challenging because it is a long way out of Spitfire range. But in any case, the first thing we have to do is fight the Guija. And so we attempt to fight the Guija. Now, my personal rule of thumb is that if I don't have AP rounds, ideally I want damage 16 minimum, or equivalent, to try and fight a tag. I don't really want to fight an armor 8 tag with a damage 15 weapon. It's just slightly too easy for them to pass, multiple saves, but the Sphinx can at least theoretically inflict a lot of hits because it's putting the Guija at a -6. And so the rest of this turn is that we spend 6 orders shooting at the Guija and do 0 wounds. I don't roll particularly well. I'm averaging maybe like 2 hits per volley, and Nick just passes all of his armor rolls, and he needs 5s to do so. It's not super weird. I land probably about 10 hits on him over the course of those 6 orders, which is not like I would expect to have done more. That's not a great outcome. That's pretty poor. And from, 10 hits, you might reasonably have expected 2 wounds. But that's only a, like, you might have. It's reasonably possible, or even reasonably probable, that you might do a couple of wounds to the Guija that way. You can brute force an attack, but equally, you can just not brute force an attack, because it is effectively armor 11 and cover, and your damage 15. You have a 20% chance per hit of doing a wound. And 20% chances not materializing is not super weird. Still, we follow the rule of thumb for using a tag like a Sphinx. And what we do is we reserve some orders to after we finish this engagement, we kept two orders in the order pool to pull the Sphinx back out of line of sight and fully recamouflage. So look, worst case scenario in terms of how this turn has progressed, I have killed one enemy model and I've done a classified and I've lost nothing myself. That is not an optimal first turn, but it's not terrible either. So Nick rolls into his first turn, and there's not a lot he can do in terms of impetuousing. Over here, he declines to break the link, but this Varangian has a good, clean impetuous order, and so it will move up this direction. From there, Nick has a bunch of things he wants to accomplish this turn, and he has a nice full order pool to go with it, multiple tactical awareness orders, etc. The Blade Ops will just use its tactical awareness order to, I think, maybe pull back to here, or no, it will go into suppressive fire, being relatively safe there. And it doesn't need to repair anything, so well and good for it. The Guija will use the bulk of the remainder of the orders in that combat group to engage and destroy the Q-drone. That takes a fair few orders. I think it takes its tactical awareness order plus one. Actually, no, it only takes its tactical awareness order plus one other order, which it uses to move forward. And then it moves up and around, and it does not have a ton of orders left at this point, but it moves up and around to see the Sphinx. And then it discovers the Sphinx and succeeds as part of that first movement. And then I think it has 2 orders left at that point after engaging and destroying the Q-drone, and it destroys the Sphinx. Now, this is also relatively unlucky. The Sphinx, obviously, it needs to roll 8 to hit the Sphinx, but the Sphinx is 1 dice on 14's back. I miss. I think he hits crits. And the Sphinx goes down. It takes 2 orders to kill the Sphinx. It's a complete whiff the first time, and then that happens the second. And he puts it actually not just unconscious, but he will finish it off with this Beast Hunter, which is in Combat Group 1. This Beast Hunter is going to end up like hopping down and then fire a Panzerfaust through sort of like the gap through here, and that Panzerfaust will hit because the Sphinx has no Mimetism 6 anymore because it's unconscious. It will hit, needing an 11, and the 2 hit does 3 hits rather, armor piercing, and destroys the Sphinx all the way to dead. So that's not great. That is in fact not ideal. We are down a 90-something point tag, but Nick has not done any classifieds. So, all right, we're still in this. Now, the remainder of Nick's turn is spent moving basically this Varangian Guard that impetuous forward, up and around like this, and he gets some smoke down. He actually uses the smoke to enable for a few pieces to move forward, etc. This is basically just a bit of positioning. And the Danavas is going to do a bit of activity as well. So what will end up at the end of this turn is that he will have moved the Varangian Guard through to here, and then basically gone, actually, I think it's better if I don't do anything else with this and I make this your problem. So the Varangian Guard will move to here, and the Beast Hunter will move to here. What he's attempting to do here is hope to force me to spend my orders to have my impetuous troops trade into his. He's got, Dogged and flamethrowers and stuff like that, so do I. So he wants me to actually, I don't have much Dogged, so he wants me to take this fight in my active turn. Otherwise, the rest of the orders of in this first combat group are spent developing the Danavas, so she'll come up and around to here. She'll throw a pitcher up to there, so there are now 2 deployable repeaters in the midfield. One of them here from the Guilang previously, and then one of them here, and then she will enter Cyber Mask. And that Cyber Mask is going to be quite important, because Norkias is a Whip 15, he's not a particularly special killer hacker apart from reasonable whip, but I am a desperate enough man to consider checking a repeater network just to get a kill on the Danavas. That is something that you can still do if you are even solid enough at hacking, and I may well try it. So my turn begins, and we can see the Q-drone is unconscious. The Guija has ended up moving around to here. This is the point from which it engaged the Sphinx. And then we have the Varangian Guard and the Beast Hunter over here. Now, this is a blessing in disguise for me. The Beast Hunter has laid a mine, otherwise he's building this kind of picket situation. I am very happy with this because I am trying to do Predator. And so we basically take a combination of regular and irregular orders, and this Gaki and this Tiger creature will, between the 2 of them, kill these 2 pieces. Now, they will get annihilated doing so. There is enough Overwatch to make that happen. And in fact, the Beast Hunter will end up placing another AP mine. Like each time something comes forward, he'll just spend all of his mines. But I'm going to lose my 2 guys. Nick is going to lose his. This doesn't actually take too many orders on my part. It's relatively clean to do. But importantly, it gets me Predator. So, excellent. I've got my secret classified done. That's 3 points in the bag. At this point, There's not a ton more that I can realistically do until maybe the end of the game to accomplish classifieds, but I'm also kind of pinned down in terms of forward momentum because I really don't have much that can fight the Guija. Specifically, the big problem is that there's this deployable repeater here, so if I just try and like YOLO Norkias in to deal with the Guija, the first problem is I'm not going to get there without being discovered. Cybermask is a very weak marker state, and these two freaking Weeble drones are still here with providing discover AROs inside reasonable range bands. And secondly, Nikias is not a sure thing to fight the creature anyway. Now, fortunately, EMCCW means I only have to win that roll once, and then I will kill the thing. But any AROs here will potentially really do me some pain. Lenkai is still hanging out down here. And doing all of this would require moving through a repeater, where I would be taking potentially multiple hacking AROs. So what we attempt to do instead, firstly, we're going to use the Caliban. It'll spend 2 orders recovering the Q drone and then recamouflaging itself. Then we were going to have Norkias crawl up and around and face check the repeater network. I'm hoping that the Denavis reveals herself. I'm going to engage the Fusilier if I don't use stealth, right? So I'm going to engage the Fusilier if she doesn't reveal herself, but Nick very smartly does not reveal herself. So it takes me 2 orders, I think, but I just blow the Fusilier's brain out through its own repeater network. And again, I put it all the way to dead. That's kind of handy. And the Denavis just steadfastly refuses to reveal. And that is very smart because Norkias would probably beat her in a fight there. She can't realistically Oblivion me because there's a Caliban engineer hanging out right behind Norkias. So there's no like good outcome there. And Nick needs her to do HVT espionage. She's in an excellent position to do so. She'll probably do it next turn. So that basically limits really all that I feel like I can reasonably do with my turn, other than hope to pin Nick's order pull back a little bit. The Q drone, having been stood up, will use one of its orders, it will engage, and it will knock unconscious this Fugazi. That's going to turn out to be a mistake. And otherwise, we will just try and develop our defenses in this position further. We really can't, like the cover, even with this Fugazi down, the cover that is on this Guija, because I have not been able to destroy this repeater, the Narvis is still there. If I move into CC with the Guija, I absolutely will believe that Narvis will reveal herself, and the Caliban is not going to be fast enough. Also, frankly, yeah, it's an order it's an order to Cybermask, then it's up and around, I get discovered. I here absolutely will discover because again I'm in a repeater area. This coordinated defense, this layered defense where we have the repeater here and the Guija here, it's got a template weapon, it's got a powerful explosive round. There's no way to comfortably make this run. What I should have done is just remembered that Norkias, in this kind of circumstance, so firstly, he can hack. I could reasonably have moved up and attempted to total control the Guija. It wouldn't have done anything in the sense of it wouldn't have it wouldn't have developed the game state. Nick had ample to recover, ample command tokens rather to recover the Guija with, and he could potentially even have hacked it back if it began to move. But it would have cleared the way to to move forward. Or, failing that, I should have pushed Nokias into CC with it, not by trying to use Cybermask, but just by using Datarazi to throw smoke. Smoke in this kind of situation is still comfortably the best way to move into CC, and those billion points that you're paying for Norkias over an Umbra Samaritan do give you the credible kind of offense to actually give you its high risk, because if the Guija beats you, you will explode, and you're getting no Prothean wounds from this. But with an EMCCW, high CC, martial arts, burst 2, Norkias has a good chance of crippling the Guija and subsequently killing it. So I should have used Adarazi's smoke here, and that's going to be one of the takeaways we'll talk about at the end of the game. I didn't, I just developed my defensive posture further, which means Nick could basically go ahead and do the things that he wanted to do. Now, I was ostensibly winning up until this point, but Nick rolled into his second turn with no classifieds done, but immediately the Blade Ops pulls back to here, I think, or something like that. But anyway, it breaks Suppressive Fire, and it restores the down Flash Pulse bot, which scores him his classified, recovering a model using an engineer. He then moves the Denavis up and around, sort of around to here, where he's able to HVT espionage, and then he moves the Guija down off of its position here, around like this, and he's able just so I think he uses something to detonate. I don't know what, but I think he uses something to clear this mine from memory, and he's able to just poke his head around, see the HVT. He's prone. See the HVT that is standing, and does the does the identity check, which secures him another classified. And this is the point where we're bad news bears, because Nick has just done 3 classifieds, I've only done 2. Trying to do a third is going to be a challenge. Other than that, Nick just moves his Guija up and forward, putting the Q drone down once again. I'm happy with that. It takes a few orders this time to put down the Q drone. It's taking, I think it took 2 in the first turn. It takes 3 in the second. It's only 1 order for me to recover it, plus the 1 order that I lose by having it be unconscious when my turn begins. Ultimately, it's a solid and controllable trade. The biggest issue is that I'm recamouflaging the Caliban most of these times, and that means that the order trade is more even than I would like, but the Caliban brings enough that that is worthwhile. Nevertheless, we're in a rough spot now, and realistically, the only classified that I can do from here is it's one of two. It's either attempting to have Norkias Civivac the HVT, or it's attempting to have Norkias end in base contact with an enemy trooper in Nick's half of the table. So we roll into turn 3. We can see that Danavis has re-cybermasked back here. Lang Kai has moved forward to this position here, and then the Guija has moved forward to this position here. And the Guija again is being a colossal pain. Now it is positioned now in a spot where there is basically no way for me to jump Lang Kai, sorry, not Lang Kai, jump Norkias up and fit a Silhouette 2 model in base contact with it, because the building that it's on just doesn't allow space, which means that the option of engaging NCC is now off the table. I kind of just have to move around or past it or attempt to hack it. If this scenario was not highly classified, I would seriously consider hacking it a go, but it doesn't profit me at this point to do it, to neutralize it. I have to do classifieds, and that's all I have to do. The Guija can't do any classifieds. It's not going to accomplish anything on the third turn. I have to attempt to I've got very few orders. I have to attempt to do the last things that I can. So I spend my remaining command tokens. Fortunately, I have a fair few because I haven't needed to reroll to repair the Q drone, and I consolidate pretty much everything into a single combat group, and we go for it. So we use, again, a combination of Cybermask. We don't use nearly enough smoke for this. I should use considerably more than I have been doing. And we're able to get Norkias up and around and over. He gets discovered on the way through, but makes it to the safety side of the fence. And at this point, I have a problem because I need to put Fusiliers unconscious. And the thing about Norkias' CC is that it's not going to put a Fusilier unconscious. It's going to put a Fusilier all the way to dead, like 95% of the time. And that means I can't run into CC with him. I have to shoot them with his frickin' breaker rifle. And I'm not super happy about that. It's like a technically good problem to have, but it's a problem I could do without at this particular time. And so Norkias from this position here engages a Fusilier with a combi rifle here, and he just gets wounded taking this fight because he's a BS-12 idiot. Samaritans suck at gunfighting, and they shouldn't be doing it. And if you want a weapon on a ranged weapon on a Samaritan, you take the plasma rifle on the baseline Samaritan, which you use for opportunistic template attacks only and nothing else. Trying to gunfight using a 47-point model with a BS-12 breaker is crap. And so Norkias just gets wounded in ARO, at which point he is forced to just attempt it, right? So he makes the run through this space, hoping to kill, at this point, frankly, kill and get 2 wounds from the Fusilier, but he gets flash pulsed on the way through, and he kills the Fusilier all the way to dead. There are no unconscious models remaining, which means that that's it. That's the end of his run. He got done in by a lonely Fugazi and a pleb with a combi rifle. And there's nothing else that he can do to accomplish this round because he can't put anything unconscious, which means he can't fulfill that classified. I do a few other sort of game attempts to put things sort of my way, but Nick is up. Nick has won the game at the end of this turn, and indeed all he needs to do to lengthen the lead even further is to move Lang Kai up and around here into base contact with this tiger creature. And that puts him also having capture. Lang Kai, of course, can't do HVT kidnapping. And so that's it. Nick has accomplished 3 of the public classifieds and his own private classified. I've accomplished 1 of my classifieds and my own private classified, which means it is a 9-4 win to White Company. Now, that was kind of the expected result and kind of my penance. I forgot about this list and playing it for Jordan for like a month. And so, damn it, we're going to run this thing face first into a scenario that it is absolutely not designed for and just see how it performs offensively. And so we're not going to evaluate its performance in terms of how is it as a highly classified list, because it's a shit highly classified list. That's not the point. It's not built for that. How is it as a general list? Well, Nick built a list to try and beat Torchlight by having an Armor 8 tag and a bunch of solid ARO pieces, And that worked super well here. This table is, frankly, it's a little open. Like it's in the top 50% of open tables that still fall within the playable category. It's got plenty of nooks and crannies and places to hide and interior spaces, etc. It's just got some, some wide-ish fire lanes and some particularly tall terrain in the DZ, slightly lower terrain. Even with this infinitely tall building, this was a table that you could draw some big ARO pieces on, big ARO lanes on. And then Nick just slammed a Guija onto the highest spot on his table. The Guija is a tag that can get down from that very easily, and I just face checked it, and I couldn't do anything because this list has got damage 15 guns. And this was a really good example of how you can layer defenses to stall out something like a Sphinx. So there was the close paths up the table, like just the running in these directions, stalled out by a repeater. You can get through a repeater, but you have to get through a repeater without being discovered. So you layer your defenses by putting really good cheap discover pieces in place, so that any attempt to move past the repeater gets you discovered, or at least the risk of discovered while you're doing so, and you can't respond by shooting them because you're inside the repeater area. And then you layer that with some serviceable hard ARO pieces like the Beast Hunter, the Fusilier Missile Launcher, and then of course the Guija. Now putting a Guija in a position like this is incredibly risky if you are not confident that it can actually stall out your opponent. The usual rule of thumb is you put a tag in a position where it can guts back into safety if it gets wounded. But Nick made the absolutely clear read that this Shazvastii in a combined army shell hit like a wet noodle, and he was absolutely correct. It stalled me completely. It was a super clean read, and it won him the game at the counter because of just how well he layered his defenses and his AROs and stalled me the fuck out. Now, does that mean I think the Shazvastii in vanilla combined concept is hopeless? Well, I do think it is weaker than running good things in vanilla combined. Like a mentor lieutenant for 23 points is a serviceable piece, but you can put so many veterans in a vanilla combined list that you can render yourself almost immune to loss of lieutenant without even needing to take an aspect. Which means you could take a Nexus Hacker, for example, which is a lieutenant that would actually do things, or, by the by, you could take an aspect. Aspects are really good lieutenants. They're one of the reasons why we play vanilla combined army. Then we then start looking at things like, okay, what about the Q-Drone and Caliban? That's a good combination. I will hardly recommend that in any list. It's one of the best things from Shazvastii that's just ported into vanilla combined. And then we get to the Sphinx. So the Sphinx in this particular case is what let us down. It was 93 points of borderline dead weight. It killed a single 15-point Fusilier and was taken out mostly due to some dice, but it was taken out relatively trivially by the Guija. Now, if we're going to dedicate ourselves to keeping the Sphinx into the list, we can adjust how we play this. And how I would adjust the play patterns here is that I needed to be using the Datarazi considerably more aggressively. Smoke means that you can't get discovered. Even a camouflage marker can move, like there is no rule against moving camouflage markers through smoke. And so I needed to be having those Datarazi in a combat group where they could throw smoke independently of the Sphinx and set them up to do so that the Sphinx or Norkias could advance. Norkias without having to cyber mask, because fuck having to cyber mask, it takes an entire order, it sucks. You use it only as a last resort. And the Sphinx without having to risk discover rolls. Ideally, I think we get potentially a third Datarazi in here. Frankly, though, the way to do that is to turn Norkias into a regular Samaritan, and this list wanted to use Norkias, so we'll honor that in this particular case. So this is a play pattern change. I needed to, so we'll reorganize the groups slightly, basically get the Datarazi in a situation where they are your supporting elements. So I would be inclined to have Combat Group 2 consist of, for example, at least one of the Datarazi, potentially both, and the Caliban, and the Q-Drone, and then one or two of the Warband, so 2 target creatures. That puts Combat Group 1, I don't love how that leaves Combat Group 1, basically leaves you with 2 irregulars, 2 heavy hitters, and then just a ton of order pool models. But we're dedicating ourselves to the Sphinx and Norkias, so that's kind of what we've got to do. And then you have a plan where the Datarazi lay the smoke that you need to get these close assault pieces forward. The Sphinx uses a combination of smoke and marker state. Norkias uses a combination of smoke, marker state, and stealth, noting that marker state is a last resort. And you use them to then get in and scalpel. So we do things like, for example, we lay smoke in like these positions. Probably we would need, where would we need smoke? So we would need smoke here and here. And then we can get the Sphinx through and around around this way and start hitting things from behind. That could have potentially been a play. Now, it wouldn't have secured me any classifieds, and I felt like I needed to do those in highly classified, but that kind of a play. Or when Norcaius was making like these runs around here and attempting to do this, if this Datarazi that ended up over here was more developed, right? If I'd had the orders to pull it forward to here, and we could do things like maybe throw smoke around this way and get some smoke down there, that would actually frankly have enabled Norcaius to get in base contact with the HVT, and once he's in base contact with the HVT, as a move action, he can declare Civivac. If the Denarvis reveals, he can blow her freaking brains out. He'll make that attempt, and then he can pull back safely. So I needed to be considerably more active with my Datarazi. Ideally, they would have been in a combat group that supports that. You can rejig the list to do that. That, I think, was the key. That, look, the way things went, it was not going to have changed the outcome of the game because we saw that Nick went to 4 classifieds, I only went to 2. But if I'd been able to Civivac that HVT, it would have put me on 3 classifieds, which gets you 5 points. 5 points gives you the offensive bonus in a tournament, and that can really make the difference. You always want to be aiming for those 5 points if you can, and I would have been able to do it in this scenario if I'd made better use of the pieces that I had with Smoke. So, those are my takeaways for this particular case. Do I think this is an ideal list? Well, look, if I start proposing changes to this, we're immediately just going to do things like cut the Sphinx for a WhiteCo, cut Norcaius for a Samaritan, cut the Mentor Lieutenant for something like a Nexus, and at that point we just have a list that I wrote 2 years ago. Right? It's not interesting, it's not unique, I've played it plenty of times before, and it's falling back into the generic CA mold where the point here is to try something different. So we aren't going to suggest that in this case. We're going to say play patterns and changes of play patterns and maybe a slight group reorganization could potentially help this list accomplish more than it did in this game. With that said, Jordan, thank you very much for being a channel supporter and for submitting this list. I have gotten to it eventually. If you like the content that I make and you want to support the channel, you can do so either via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description. I do genuinely use that money mostly to buy coffee. It gets me through videos like this, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. That is super welcome and super valuable. If you are a channel member or a supporter and you would like me to cover a topic or try out not necessarily an entire list, but something, an army, a scenario, a concept, you can do so either by donating at Buy Me a Coffee and leaving a message, or just leaving a message in the comments saying, hey, channel supporter here, I would be interested in blah. I do take note of them. I just maybe forget them occasionally if you send them to me as direct messages where I can't keep track of them. As always, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.